It was November of the year 1581. Tsar IV, in the midst of a fit of rage, thrust a piece of coal iron into the head of his son, Sharovik Ivan, who shared the same name with him. The young man, felled to the ground by his father's fierce attack, did not understand what had happened. However, it did not take long for him to realize the horrifying event. He knelt down beside his son, who lay on the ground, and embraced him. But it was too late. His son would lose his life due to his father's anger. That night, what was lost with Ivo's anger was not only his son's life, but also the future of Russia. Difficult times awaited the Russians. Dimitri, one of Cheriva's remaining two sons, was too young to rule the country. The other son, Fyodor, had no confidence in Ivan. He thought Ivan was not competent enough for the job. Therefore, he established a council of regents consisting of leading nobles and other members of the court. This council appointed capable individuals whom he believed could govern the country in place of his son. The council was supposed to ensure that Fyodor would rule the country properly when he ascended to the throne. How well this would work in practice would be revealed after Ivan's death. Shortly after establishing the council, in the year 1584, Ivo passed away, and his son Fyodor succeeded him. The one who benefited the most from this was Boris Godunov, Fyodor's brother-in-law. Godunov was appointed head of the council, making him the most powerful man among the country's elite nobles. However, in Russia, which was constantly embroiled in power struggles, this was a highly precarious position. Ivan, who was not very pleased with Godunov's control over affairs, attempted to gain more power and take control of the Boyar Council in 1585. Godunov resisted Ivan's ambitious move, and one of his most significant allies in this was Nikita Romanov, the leader of the Romanovs who would later rule Russia. However, Ivan's move ended his political career, and the collaboration with the Romanovs initiated a temporary alliance between their families. Godunov, who practically governed Russia through Tsar, would need such alliances. After less than 2 years passed since Ivan's move in 1586, Godunov began attempts to seize power in the Boyar Council. However, he too failed like Ivan and was forced to become a monastery monk. Now he was the most powerful man in Russia. Although Fyodor officially took the throne, everyone knew that Boris Godunov was the one who effectively managed the country. Some were content with this situation, while others hated him for it. Some of those who were against Godunov did not openly play their cards but were waiting for the right moment. As mentioned earlier, he had a younger brother named Tsar. However, some boyars believed that instead of Fyodor, who had handed over all the administration to Godunov, the place of a very young Dimitri should be taken. Rumors about this began to circulate around the court. Not long after these rumors, Dimitri died in an accident in 1591. He continued to rule the country strikingly for another 7 years. In 1598, when he died without a male heir, the official end of the Rurik dynasty, which had ruled the country for 9 centuries, occurred. So what would happen now? Who would lead the country? Naturally, eyes turned to Boris Godunov, who had practically ruled the country for years. After all, he was the most experienced. After years of preparation, Godunov was ready to become the sole Tsar of Russian territories. In 1598, he was summoned by the country's leading nobles. However, the conditions had changed suddenly. When he emerged as a candidate to be Tsar, one of the most severe moves against him was made by Fyodor Romanov from the Romanov family, his former ally. In return, Boris Godunov, who had eliminated one by one the most powerful nobles in Russia, did not find this a significant problem. Within 2 years, he eliminated this rival as well. Just as he had forced Fyodor to become a monastery monk, he put an end to his potential political career. At that moment, Godunov's power had reached its peak. However, he was about to experience the loneliness of being at the top very intensely. From the year 1601 onward, Russian territories began to experience disaster upon disaster. The main cause of these disasters was the cold weather. Yes, Russia had never been a very hot country, but in the summer months of 1601, temperatures, especially at night, had dropped so much that crops began to freeze. This situation turned into a nationwide food crisis. Right after that, an epidemic broke out. In the years 1602 and 1603, millions of people either starved or died from illness. Social order was completely disrupted. The measures taken by Godunov were limited to heavy taxes. Eventually, the people and nobles began to rebel. Thus began the period in Russian history that would be known as the Time of Troubles or Smuta. However, it should be remembered that every crisis can be an opportunity for another. In fact, the situation that emerged in Russia during those years was not very different. There were those who wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. For example, Russia's western neighbor, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So, what kind of government did the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth represent? And how exactly would the turmoil in Russia serve their interests? In the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the opportunity that nobles were waiting for to gain power over Russia presented itself when a man named Dimitri appeared. This man had an interesting claim. He asserted that he was the former Tsar Dimitri. According to what he said, he had fled to Polish territories years ago, escaping from rivals who wanted to kill him. Now that he was an adult, he could return and rightfully seize the throne, liberating Russia from Godunov's oppression. Dimitri's words and his efforts to regain the throne primarily caught the attention of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth king and the nobles under his command. Declaring an outright war and invading Russia was too risky. Instead, it made more sense to provide military support to Dimitri and intervene in Russian territories. The main factors that made this option sensible were twofold. Firstly, there were those in Russia who were satisfied with Boris Godunov's rule. However, these nobles would, of course, object to the outright invasion of the country by another kingdom. But they could support a new Tsar who was believed to be connected to the old Rurik dynasty. This way, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth would get rid of Godunov and, when they supported the new Tsar, could seize the affluent power contained within them. The second factor that made supporting Dimitri's cause sensible was his inclination towards becoming a Catholic. For the Poles, who were closely tied to the Catholic faith, having allies in Russia who would ascend to the throne and be Catholic was crucial. They believed that, with a Catholic Tsar, they could also attract the Orthodox Russian people to their churches. Yes, supporting this Tsar who emerged with interesting claims would definitely be very beneficial. Now, with the support of Polish allies, Dimitri had finished his preparations and it was time to implement his plan to seize the throne. In October 1604, with 2,500 soldiers provided by the Poles and accompanied by a Polish noble named Melisses, Dimitri crossed the Polish border and entered Russian territories. As if everyone was waiting for him to step into the country, a new turmoil erupted in Russia all of a sudden. Especially the people of cities and villages in the southern and southwestern regions, declaring their support for Dimitri against Godunov's rule, started to conflict with Godunov's supporters. Thus, the first large-scale civil war of the Time of Troubles began. However, it would not last so long. Tsar Boris Godunov died in 1605 as a result of a stroke, and his son, Second Fifer, inherited the throne. However, he would not sit on the throne for a very long time either. Less than a month later, Dimitri, with his men, entered Moscow and was crowned as the new Tsar of Russia on July 21, 1605. His first act was to visit the grave of the fourth Ivan, whom he claimed to be his father, and meet with Ivan's last wife, Mariana Gay. By claiming that he was the son Dimitri who disappeared years ago, he confirmed his story. This caused some boyars who thought he was a fraud to change their minds. However, there were also those who did not believe this. In the end, Maria might have made a deal with Dimitri to gain power and maintain her significant position in the Russian court. In other words, discussions about whether the new Tsar was fake or real were still ongoing. Yes, Dimitri had gained the support of a significant faction and ascended to the throne, but he was still not safe. He had to be careful. Also, to be able to obtain so much power, money, and men all of a sudden, he must have made great promises to the Poles. At this point, he had to keep his supporters happy. In line with the promises he made to them, he converted to the Catholic faith and announced that he would marry a Polish woman. Thus, he would be bound to the Poles through both religion and marriage. Dimitri's actions were perceived as an affront to Russian Orthodox culture by both the common people and the nobility. In reality, no one expected him to deliver anything to the Poles. This became evident when he came to power with their support. However, this was deemed unacceptable. Some boyars and opinion leaders who supported him began to regret their decision. This regret, combined with the long-standing resentment of those who never liked Dimitri from the beginning, turned into the precursor of a new rebellion. The mastermind behind the planned uprising was Vasily, a member of the old family. Vasily, belonging to one of Russia's oldest families, initiated a defamation campaign against the Tsar by involving his brothers, Ivan and Dimitri. According to their claims, Tsar Dimitri was an imposter. He was not a former ruler's child who had escaped from the palace years ago. He was a fugitive monk named Grigory Otrepyev. He had no connection to the Rurik dynasty and was presented as a puppet by the Poles, who failed to conquer the country on a large scale. The campaign initiated by the brothers with these allegations was so successful that it quickly gained support from nobles, the common people, and clergy. Discontent towards the Catholic Dimitri, perceived as a betrayal of Russian Orthodox traditions, was growing. However, there were also those who wanted him to stay in power, believing that Russia working together with Poland-Lithuania would be better for the country. In short, removing Tsar Dimitri from the throne was not going to be as easy as thought. A detailed plan had to be prepared, and the two brothers set to work to achieve this. The wedding Dimitri would hold with the Polish noblewoman Marina Nisik could be a magnificent opportunity. Hundreds of Polish nobles had come to Moscow for the wedding. All the supporters and nobles who backed Dimitri were gathered there. On May 17, 1606, the brothers gathered all their supporters and stormed the Kremlin. Chaos ensued. Although Dimitri managed to escape by jumping out of a window during the confusion, he did not get far due to breaking his leg during the jump and was killed by the supporters of the brothers. The plan was successful. They had gotten rid of the false Tsar Dimitri. Vasily Shuaysky, without allowing more uncertainty to spread in the chaotic situation, declared himself Tsar on May 19, 1606. On June 1, 1606, he was crowned in a ceremony in Moscow. Vasily Shuaysky thought that by acting quickly, he could resolve his problems, but he was mistaken, because he was not loved by everyone. He was seen as an opportunist who would do anything to gain power. The dissatisfaction with the new Tsar turned into almost hatred for some nobles. Thus, a new rebellion group was formed. According to this group's claim, the person who died during the chaos Shuaysky caused was not Dimitri but someone who resembled him. The rebels, sending a letter to Prince Koyu, whom they considered close to them, asked him to find Dimitri, who might have escaped during the chaos. Prince Koy went on a mission to fulfill the rebel group's request. However, he could not find Dimitri anywhere. However, there was another way to overthrow Shuaysky. Prince Koy headed south towards the country's border. Here lived a Kazakh community numbering in the tens of thousands. The prince held a meeting with them. These Kazakhs had chosen a man named Sherevich as their leader. This man claimed to be the secret son of the former Tsar. According to him, Boris Godunov had hidden him from the court nobles to prevent him from being seen as a threat. Now he was ready to do what was necessary for Russia and to take back from those who had wrongfully taken the throne from him. There was no evidence to support Pyotr's claim to be Tsarevich. It was not very likely that Boris Godunov would be unaware of any son after his stroke. Nevertheless, Prince Koy, with his tens of thousands of warriors, decided to support Pyotr. He invited him to enter Moscow and end Vasily Shuisky's rule. Pyotr accepted this invitation and started moving north with his men. Pyotr's rebels settled in Tugla, but they wouldn't have the opportunity to launch an attack from there, because Vasily's forces had besieged Tugla. While the siege of Tugla continued, in July 1607, another false Tsar emerged, claiming to be the surviving Dimitri from Justin's wedding day. Known as the second false Dimitri, this man asserted that he was the Dimitri who had survived from the wedding day of Justin. According to what he said, the person shot that day was not himself but another man whom Shuisky mistakenly thought resembled the Tsar. The rebel forces trapped in Tugla announced that they supported the claims of the new Dimitri. Vasily Shuisky was determined to continue military operations against those gathered around the new false Dimitri, and thus a new war of the false Tsars began in Russia.